Hello and welcome to Oaklandside 510. I'm Tasneem Raja, Editor-in-Chief of the Oaklandside, Oakland's nonprofit independent newsroom. Today, we're going to talk about the places that make Oakland, Oakland. From historic homes and neighborhoods to landmarks to parks, cultural spaces, these places hold our stories, hold the stories of our city. We did this recently at a conversation at the new Parkway Theater, part of our popular Culture Makers series. For today's episode, we're bringing you that conversation. But first, a word from today's episode sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by the owners of Jack London Square, Oakland's waterfront, right at the edge of the estuary. Whether you're catching the Sunday farmers market, grabbing dinner with a bay view, or just taking a walk past the historic Heinhold Saloon, Jack London Square is where Oakland meets the water. With restaurants, live events, the ferry to San Francisco, and more, it's Oakland's only publicly accessible waterfront destination. Come see what's happening. Visit jacklondonsquare.com. All right, let's turn to an evening recorded on July 9th at the new Parkway Theater, moderated by our arts and community reporter, Azucena Rasilla. Here's Azucena kicking off that conversation.
Let's welcome our first guest, who really needs no introduction. You might know him as the brain behind my favorite podcast, East Bay Yesterday. Also for his amazing writing on SF Gate, Oakland Side. He's everywhere writing about culture, history. Come on, he's one of my favorite writers too. Please help me welcome Liam O'Donoghue. My next guest, she has been a longtime advocate of our city's parks. She previously served as a commissioner for the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. And now she's the executive director and CEO of the Oakland Parks and Recreation Foundation. Please help me welcome Mandolin Kadera-Redmond. And last, but certainly not least, he is part of one of my absolute favorite places in Oakland, in Fruitvale. I love this place so much, so dearly for everything that they do. He is in charge of programming, preservation. He deeply cares about the immigrant and refugee communities who walk through the doors of this place. Please help me welcome the executive director of Friends of Peralta Hacienda Historical Park, Miguel Lopez. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good to be back.
Let's start. Peralta Hacienda obviously holds a special place in Oakland's history. Tell me just briefly, or tell the folks, what kind of programming Peralta offers?
We do all kinds of programming. We have a Khmer New Year Festival. It's the biggest one in Oakland. This year we had about 1,500 Cambodian people having an amazing time. We do a Three Kings Day celebration. It's mostly geared towards kids. We do the crowns and the hats and the rosca and all that kind of stuff. It's not religious. We just celebrate the cultural aspect of it. We do a really great event for Black History Month called Mexico Negro y Querido, which is one of our staff members is from La Costa Chica, which is where Acapulco is, the state of Acapulco. And he's Afro-Mexican, so he talks about his experience growing up in that area, and then a lot about the history of African people who were kidnapped from Africa, from their homes and brought to this new place. We do a lot of resource fairs. We do food distributions. We do programming for young people. We do stewardship events. We do historical events as well. We do museum tours, as well as field trips for third and fourth graders, all about kind of the colonial period in early California history.
Love that. Thank you so much. Mandolin, you are the it girl when it comes to advocating for parks and how they are not only kept in good condition, but a place for community to gather. You're the one that people look up to see what you're working on. But at one point in your career, I was doing some research, you were also part of the arts and culture sphere as the business manager for Guapole.
I've got to jump in with one bit of Oakland history trivia, because that's what I do. The first woman to have a video on YouTube ever. No, for real. That is a fact.
That is good Oakland trivia. That's right.
Good Oakland trivia.
Mandolin, you were also part of the efforts to develop the Black Arts Movement Business District. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up Here.
So many things. Thank you. Thank you for your research and for inviting me and to be amongst such great colleagues. Yes, what a journey. That is how I came into this work. Is our artists were working and performing in parks, and part of the Sundays in the Redwoods experience up at Joaquin Miller Park. And I started asking some questions. Let's activate some of these spaces, and can we do more of this? And how do we scale this? And what about that historical building I see falling apart over there? And they said, you would make a great commissioner. Come and be a part of this. And I just have continued to ask questions and invite people to activate these spaces. Sometimes it is through arts, which is a great way to get things moving. And then as I'm looking closer, I realize, a lot of what got us here, and thank you, Oakland side, for looking at systems, is it's a system and it's a policy. And let's look at that. And how can we sort out a better pathway?
What are some from all the activations that you did at these various places? Is there a favorite that comes to mind?
Oh, a favorite, all for different reasons. What comes to mind immediately, and Miguel and I have talked about this, is the creek restoration work that's happening right now. So Cortland Creek, which goes alongside High, has been buried or covered, or you might not know that it's there. And so the neighbors, as many neighbors do, they come together and they want to do something good and better for their space. And as they're doing cleanups, it'll start as a cleanup, and then they find a grant to restore the creek. And now we can see fish in that creek, and activation, the path is really clean. There's more gathering spaces. So that's what I'll say comes to mind as my favorite right now.
Thank you, Mandolin, for all the work that you do to preserve all these spaces.
Thank you.
Liam, hello.
Hello.
Now, earlier today, actually, I was reading a guest essay that you published on your Substack about the new parish, formerly known as Sweet Jimmy's.
Yeah.
What else are you? Tell the people, what else are you? Who are you? What do you do?
God. Okay, I'll tell you something very exciting. This is a scoop right now. You guys are getting it first, the first information. Tomorrow morning, I'm going out to interview the granddaughter of the person who invented the popsicle.
Wow.
Yes. Frank Epperson invented it. He was a little kid, like a young boy living in San Francisco at the time, but he invented it, got the patent on the popsicle mold, and started selling them in the East Bay at Neptune Beach out in Alameda and at Idora Park up in North Oakland. These are pre-Great Depression amusement parks. And he lived in Oakland for many years. Eventually, he had to, spoiler alert, he went broke during the Great Depression, as many people did, and had to sell the patent on the popsicle. So it is no longer a family business. But I bumped into his granddaughter randomly at another history event that I was going to. And I was like, oh, did he talk about that? She's like, he talked about it all the time. I was like, okay, can I come and interview you? She's like, yeah. And then she was sending me links about how there's like multiple books written about her grandfather and this child genius who invented putting a stick in frozen water. So I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah.
If there's one thing about Liam, when you go to an event of his or even an event where he's a panelist, is that you're going to learn some Oakland trivia every single time.
We're just getting started.
I know. Now, let me ask you, like I asked Mandolin, out of all the folks that you've interviewed, historical figures or descendants or family members, is there one that was your maybe favorite interview or favorite person?
It's impossible to pick. I've interviewed hundreds of people over the years, but I was actually just thinking about an interview that I did last night. So a lot of people are probably familiar with Sugar Pie DeSanto, local blues woman. She just passed away about 2 years ago, but she was like the living embodiment of the 7th Street, West Oakland blues scene. She grew up in the Fillmore and then moved out here in the 50s, and she kicked ass, basically, and kept going up until her 80s. And when I interviewed her, she was just so full of like fire, still dressed very stylishly, still not taking any guff from anybody. And the reason I was thinking about her is because there's a new documentary that just came out that has never screened in Oakland. It's only screened a few places on the film festival circuit now, about Big Mama Thornton, who some people might know. She did the song Hound Dog before Elvis Presley. He covered it and got rich and famous. She was a black woman from the South, helped write the song, and it was her first big hit. Never really saw any money off it other than the $500 she got paid initially. Anyway, there's a new documentary about her. She moved to Oakland in the 60s, and that kind of was a time that really revitalized her career. And I'm going to try to bring it here to the new Parkway in the fall and do a panel on West Oakland blues. So Just scoop after scoop you're getting out of me
Oh my
today.
God. Do you sleep? Do you have time to? Now, I want to kick off the conversation with actually listing the historic homes, because I feel like most of you probably know this information, but maybe not. So, okay, Peralta Hacienda. The original structure was built in 1820, but the Victorian home that we see today, that was built in 1870. And that was a Peralta family who were granted the lands from the Spanish crown. Now there is the Pardee Home Museum, which is privately owned, and that was built in 1868. Liam, do you know a quick fact about Pardee?
The mayor used to live there. And he supposedly pulled a shotgun on city workers when they tried to uproot the oak trees that were in front of his house when they were laying out the streetscape.
Now, Cameron Stanford was built in 1876, and it is the last Victorian at-lake marriage. Then there is Arbor Villa. So Arbor Villa was built in 1882. It was a 35-acre estate, and it was owned by
Borax Smith,
who
was the co-owner of the Key system, which was the electric rail system before.
And the realty co-founder of the Realty
Syndicate. Yeah.
Now, one of the only things that you can see from that grand estate is palm trees. Has anybody ever driven through 9th Avenue between East 24th and East 28th? Ever seen those huge palm trees? And you're like, why do we have palm trees on this street? Well, that's because that was the entrance to the driveway to the estate. Is that what it was?
I think part of the estate, not maybe the Arbor Villa estate still exists, but Borax Smith's wife, she was like, a socialite who did philanthropy. And so there was a couple houses in the neighborhood that I think still exist. And she had an organization basically for like young girls who were orphans, but it had a really weird name. It was like the Girls with No Friends organization. Friendless Girls.
Those girls. Oh my
They were
God.
so rude back then.
Terrible name. But also back then, it was when millionaires, they would host huge garden parties. And then every year they would donate the proceeds from their rich friends who would show up to these parties to a nonprofit. And every year it was on the paper. I mean, you go on like newspapers.com, let me tell you. Incredible archives, okay, that you find. Or even Oakland Wiki, please. It's the best information, you find it there. Okay, so then that estate, the Arbor Villa, was sold in 1924. Then it was demolished, and then the parcels were subdivided. So yeah, one of the last things is the little palm trees. Now there's Cohen Bray. That was built in 1882. And then there's the Dunsmuir-Hellman Historic Estate that was built in 1899. And the spiciest little fact that I found about that house is that the original owners, Mr. Dunsmuir and his wife, had been married for 12 years before they made their public announcement that they were married. And that was because the husband was fighting for his inheritance from his dad.
Oh, it's going to get even spicier, but just wait till we get to the Dunsmuir trivia section during the
Spicy. We love that.
Stay tuned.
Then there's the J. Moss house that was built in 1864, and that's my Mosswood Park. Then there's the Joaquin Miller Abbey. It wasn't his main house. You can see it from Joaquin Miller Road. Then there's also Preservation Park, which is privately owned, but that is a cluster of 16 19th century historic buildings. 5 of them are original of the neighborhood. And then the other 11 were moved from other parts of Oakland, mainly to avoid demolition during the urban renewal in the 1970s.
Yeah, when the 980 was being built.
Yes. If you're interested in learning more about Arbor Villa, the Oakland History Center has an amazing book.
Okay, just real quick, one thing that was cool about rich guys back then is like they were always going bankrupt.
Yes.
Like, it was like every story, like Borax Smith and like all his partners, every guy who made like a fortune in gold mining or silver mining, they made like $1 gazillion and then like somehow lost it all. Rich people never go broke anymore. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, but also rich people used to help a little more, like the civics aspect of it. Now, all these homes, all these different places, they serve as museums, cultural destinations, community spaces. They're anchors of Oakland history and really to the neighborhood identity and the city's identity. So I want to kick off the first question for all of you. Why is it important to preserve these buildings? Mandolin, you want to kick off?
Thank you. I think it's important to preserve them for all of this that just was shared. These are our stories. This is our history, and it's important to know how we go forward from there.
Miguel?
I think, as Mandolin said, it's part of our history, as complicated and unjust as it can be. At our site, we were the first site where the first non-Indigenous homes were built. It's not like the Ohlone just invited them in and said, go ahead, build a home. So it's very complicated. In our space, we consider that and explain that as part of our exhibitions.
Liam.
I think understanding and connecting with history is really important. And I think you can watch documentaries or read books, but nothing really compares to being in a historical space and smelling the smells and touching the walls and just like feeling what it would have been like to experience these things and connect to the people that live there. So, and once they're gone, they're gone. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later too, but that's why it's important to protect them, because they can never be replaced.
I know both of us have done stories on Cohen Bray. So Cohen Bray is another historic home that is in Fruitvale, and that is privately owned. Basically, that home has been in the descendants' family since it was built. Every caretaker that has been part of that home is a family member, a cousin, an uncle, an aunt. They created a nonprofit. Cameron Stanford is city-owned. Peralta Hacienda is city-owned. Pardee, if I remember correctly from my research, and you might correct me, Liam, the last living relative basically in their will, they said this has to be preserved as a museum and it cannot ever be anything else. So that's why the house has been preserved. So one thing that I want sort of people for folks who don't know, and this is for whoever wants to take on the question, is what is the difference between when it's a city-owned property versus when it's city-owned but run by a nonprofit versus privately owned? What's like the differences?
Well, I can explain our situation. So the city of Oakland owns Peralta Hacienda Historical Park, all 6 acres of the park. They own the land, the buildings, everything. And we're the nonprofit that manage it. So we're friends of Peralta Hacienda Historical Park. We have a contract with the city that entitles us to manage all the activities, all the stewardship. We call in any needs for service, whatnot. The city's responsibility is to maintain the park itself. Oakland Parks and Recs and Youth Development comes in, mows our lawns. If there's any kind of structural issues with the buildings, they come and they help with that. But we're in charge of everything inside. We're in charge of all the artwork in the park, and they're in charge of the walls. And it's an interesting relationship. It's not always wonderful, but it's what we have.
Mandolin?
To add to that, I think the Peralta Hacienda house is a great model, even though I imagine it is complicated. But I think what's happening and what you're noticing throughout the city is that's one building. And every building has to have that same kind of energy, that same sort of funding, that community involvement. And that's what I would like to see, is that we really look at this citywide. Naomi and I talk about this all the time. But yeah, it's a great model. But how do we replicate it?
Because it seems like with the houses that don't have a Friends of X, Y, and Z house, like Friends of Cameron Stanford, Friends of Peralta Hacienda, those are the homes that have essentially been semi-abandoned or just being used for storage or neglected right now.
That's right.
Now, Liam, you've been working on efforts to help Dunsmuir, which is in a terrible shape. I recently walked the grounds a couple weeks ago. The mansion is falling apart. The grotto doesn't even look like a grotto anymore. The other 2 buildings are boarded up. Talk to me a little bit about the work that you've been doing on that front.
Really, I've just been trying to be a cheerleader and help build momentum. My specialty, I don't have any kind of like legal background or expertise around like setting up nonprofit organizations. And so essentially my concept was just like, let's raise this issue and get people talking about it, and then people will come together and hopefully build momentum. There's someone here in this audience, Ed Clausen, for example, who was a part of the Friends of the Dunsmuir house that managed it and did a lot of maintenance and volunteer work and upkeep for many years.
And incredible events, too.
Incredible events, oversaw just a really thriving era of the house. But then the recession happened in 2008. And for various complicated reasons, that group lost their oversight of the house and it reverted back to the city oversight. And the city essentially, as I'm sure we're going to get into tonight, maintaining these homes is not the biggest priority. Obviously, everyone here understands how Oakland works. There's a lot of budget constraints. There's a lot of things competing for attention in City Hall. And so not being the priority means that these houses are always falling by the wayside. And every year that goes by that they're not being maintained, mold is setting in, water damage is setting in, which means the cost of the deferred maintenance just keeps getting higher and higher. And also it means they're not bringing in revenue either. So for a long time, Dunsmuir, even after the city took back over, they were renting it out for weddings and the Great Gatsby picnic and things like that. But eventually it got to a point where it just wasn't safe for people to not only be in the house, but even on the grounds anymore. And so since I put out, a couple articles and videos and things like that about the Dunsmuir estate, people have been emailing me saying, how can I get involved? How can I help? And I'm sure there's people in this audience who are thinking the same thing. And that's why I've been referring them to Mandolin and Naomi over at Oakland Heritage Alliance, who are kind of more tapped into kind of like how to actually create these structures that we will need to save these houses from disrepair, because it's going to take a huge kind of movement of folks being involved. And similar to what we've seen at Peralta Hacienda and Cameron Stanford House, they really need that kind of nonprofit structure to oversee the house and make sure that those renovations are happening.
Something interesting to your point, when I wrote the story about the fire at Cameron Stanford, and even we'll talk about the fire at Peralta as well, I got emails from readers saying, we want to volunteer. We want to go and fix what's burnt and what's broken.
Even contractors will be like, I'm a contractor.
Yeah.
I'll volunteer. I'll paint. I'm a painter.
I'm a painter. Like, how can we do fire restoration? I know I got that for the story about Cameron Stanford. So, Mandolin, tell us a little bit about why can't people just say, well, I'm a contractor, I'm a handyman, I'm going to go fix this house. Why is it that it's so complicated to go that route?
Yes, it is complicated. Why? I can't answer that exactly. The city of Oakland is complicated, but essentially there's no mechanism that the city has set up for receiving that kind of funding. And then there's things that tie up even the simplest maintenance around the grounds. I have to go check it with the union and make sure that I don't take anyone's job and make sure that it's not out of line with any of the other contracting compliances. But yes, people want to help. Contractors want to help. People want to roll up their sleeves, give dollars. And our organization, founded in 1981, has been the conduit for many of the projects, and we want to do more. But that's exactly it. It's a complicated system. We have found our way through, and we have a long-term, similar to the Peralta Hacienda house, we have a long-term agreement with the city to move those dollars into those spaces so we can hold them. And another thing just about the complexities of it is that it takes a long time, and then the mayor will change, and then the council member will change, and anything could happen that would redirect that. But we are able to hold those funds and hold those agreements and hold that sustainability of those friends groups and those volunteers so that when we get there, we can really move the needle.
Now, last question I want to ask, and this is something I posed this question to the city weeks ago when I was working on the Historic Home Guide. But why is it that the city doesn't have a historic preservation fund? Because right now, for folks who might not really understand the budget, which I feel like every new budget, you learn something new, but the funds go to the general fund, right? And then from there, the distribution goes to Parks and Rec. But then it's very, a little bit here, a little bit there. So do any of you know why the city doesn't have a historic preservation fund?
I think there's one thing that I've learned is Public Works is separate from the Parks and Rec department. So they would have to work together, which is one thing that's complicated. And then I think because it all comes into this general fund, they're working off of emergencies. And so it's about what can we get to that's the danger, not thinking forward and how do we preserve these things.
Miguel?
I also want to add that last November, we had no cultural affairs manager in the city. The city council voted to abolish that position. Quickly, there was a groundswell of against that, and luckily they reinstated the position. But if Oakland, and I don't want to say flippantly, but Oakland prides itself on its culture and its history and its art. And if they're so willing to just kind of get rid of that position, just imagine how they treat their historic houses. And also, I just wanted to add one thing to what we were saying in the last question. In addition to no mechanism for the city to accept donations or how just things take time, it's also the process. All these buildings are on the historic register of places. And so any modifications, any changes, any upkeep have to be done in a very specific way, because if you lose your certification, then it's nearly impossible to get it back. And so we have to deal with that constantly as well.
Just building off something Mandolin mentioned a minute ago, the way that the city works of only kind of responding to emergencies ends up also not being cost effective at all, because once something becomes an emergency, it becomes more expensive. So to get back to the Cameron Stanford fire example, the Cameron Stanford people, I don't know if there's any of them here, but I know you guys had been asking for security help from the city for literally years, and the city was not forthcoming with that assistance. So then there's a fire, and then it becomes a much more expensive problem to deal with. Now they had to put up the fencing and pay for round-the-clock security, and there's all this fire damage that has to be dealt with. So instead of just putting a small investment up front to stop this disaster from occurring, it's going to cost 10, 20, whatever, X times amount more to fix it and then get it back on its feet where it can start hosting weddings again and bringing in revenue.
Yeah, that's so much work that they need to do at Cameron Stanford. The past few months have been pretty devastating for some historic homes. April 4th, a fire caused significant damage to Cameron Stanford, both to the outside and the inside. And then on June 30th, a fire damaged a corner section of the outside of Peralta Hacienda. And I asked Miguel, I'm like, oh, Miguel, all that gray and black on the side of the house, was that part of the fire? And Miguel said, no, that's been like that. It just has never gotten fixed. So, Miguel, since you're here, tell us a little bit what happened with this fire.
So I was actually at home still. It was 8 o'clock and I got a phone call from a Oakland Public Works employee. So I'm at the park basically every day. They're 9 to 5. I get to know a lot of the Oakland public workers and whatnot. So Anibal, he called me and he asked me to send him some photographs of the fire damage that happened. And so I was like, well, what are you talking about? And so I contacted my staff right after that and asked if any of them had submitted a 311 request. And no one had. And so I was kind of scratching my head thinking what's going on. And then at 8:36, I got a phone call from Oakland Fire Department saying that there had been a fire at the museum and that it was under control and that the damage was on the exterior and they attributed it to an electrical fire. So I immediately got dressed. Luckily, I lived like 10 minutes from work. So I got there and I discovered that we had certainly had a fire at the house. Luckily, Oakland Public Works was already on site assessing the situation. Within about 90 minutes, Betsy Lake was on site, who is our new city administrator. And she was amazing. She actually walked the entire park with me. We assessed as we looked at the situation. She was shooting out text messages to the other departments. Big thanks to Betsy. She was really there to help us out. And I want to applaud Oakland Public Works, actually, because they've been really responsive to this situation. I'm assuming that they saw what happened at Cameron Stanford House and were afraid of what could happen at Peralta Hacienda as well. And so, yeah, they've been really responsive this entire process. You know, it takes a while. And so Public Works told me that, it's going to take a while because, again, as I said, it has to be reconstructed within very specific parameters so that we retain our historical status. Yeah, I'm just very thankful for Oakland Public Works and their immediate response. It's not always like that, but in this situation, it was.
Now, you were explaining, so the fire happened. They came and assessed the damage. The city has what the damage is. But if it isn't a fire and something needs to be repaired, what is your process for submitting that request?
So our process is, they always tell us call 311. Could do a C-click fix. And so whenever there's an issue, we contact the city, follow the proper protocol. Whether they get to it or not on time, that's another issue. Within the park, we also have a community center, which is often a spot of vandalism, of break-ins. We actually were broken into again last night. In those kind of situations, when the building is exposed to continued theft or break-in, they'll come and they'll board it up. Hence why our community center right now looks like a shanty. Most of the glass windows around it have been boarded up, and we desperately need the city to fix the rest, to fix the windows, because it just looks bad. It looks bad, and so people see that, and they assume that it's not being looked after, and so they can just kind of do what they want. And so, yeah, we typically get a lot of graffiti on the building and continuous break-ins. So
now, one thing that I learned when I met with you after the fire is that even though it serves so many youth, you guys don't have any water fountains.
Yeah, correct. We have no official water fountains in the park. So this is what I've learned about the park. The dream for the park started in the 70s. There was a community activist named Claudia Albano, her home was actually where our playground is. So she was the community force that galvanized people to request a park, that they wanted a park. And then in the kind of the bureaucratic city side, there was a gentleman named Robert Apodaca, who was the commissioner of PRAC. And so together they authorized and did the paperwork needed for the park. However, apparently the park was never like on the master plan of parks. And so there's a lot of things, amenities that all the other public parks have that we don't have. So we don't have a public bathroom. We don't have a water fountain. And so a lot of this stuff we kind of rig ourselves. We have, like I said, we have a summer camp that we do. So we have to provide water for the kids. So we just figured out how to build a water fountain for them. It's not ideal. But yeah, we just do what we can with less. And it's not always great. But yeah, for the most part, the city is somewhat responsive.
Thank you, Miguel. I have one last question for you all, but first I want to run by some numbers that I received from the city, and this is about deferred maintenance. Mandolin, you might know some of these figures, maybe even you, Liam, know this number. So these are just, I received a spreadsheet from the city, and it's 3 pages long, and this is just parks, historic homes, historic buildings throughout that are owned by the city that have deferred maintenance. So at Peralta Hacienda, some of the work, this is not including what just happened with the fire, and you probably know this figure, installing lights, restoring the native garden, rehab of the home on Coolidge. The city estimates that that's about a $3 million project. So $3 million for Peralta Hacienda. Dunsmuir. I know I ran this figure with you, Liam. So some of the work that's needed, according to the city, these are all stats according to the city. It needs electrical upgrade. The 3rd floor has no electricity. They need to restore the staircase, the windows, paint. And this is not even talking about the other buildings. This is just for the mansion. The city estimates that's going to cost $10 million.
I think the other buildings are probably too far gone, honestly.
Yeah. The J. Moss House at Mosswood Park, that is about $7 million. I can go on with these numbers. Oh my God. I mean, it's such a crazy number. And like you all were saying, they operate on emergency. And now, question for you all, 2 questions actually, kind of 2 in 1. But what do you guys think that the city doesn't prioritize historic buildings? Why is it that they don't see the urgency and not keeping with this deferred maintenance year after year? Mandolin?
I think it's what we value. And if we're not putting those buildings as an important value and asset and cultural significance, then it falls to the bottom. I think the way I like to look at it when I'm looking at the city budget, we think of parks as the bouncy house in our budget, but it's not. It's so much more significant than that. And I think when we start to value these things as more and holistic experiences, then we'll see the urgency for it.
Liam?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I also feel like people do value them and they're still being defunded. And I think it's part of this across the board situation, like since Prop 13, basically where streets, schools, parks, like everything that we do care about is scrambling for like a smaller and smaller shrinking piece of the pie because the budget is just always perpetually in crisis. Even during the last boom, even before the pandemic, Oakland was having a budget crisis. So like even if in the best of times we can't be getting rid of the potholes, like how do we expect to take care of these things that, yes, they are amenities, but they're not like luxuries. They're things that people in Oakland deserve to have. They're things that we want. And like whenever I do a story about a place like the Dunsmuir House or Cameron Stanford, people always contact me to say like, I had such great memories there. I took this water painting class there. I saw this concert there. And they're maybe not the highest value of what people care about in terms of like the priorities, but I think people do care about them. And it's like, despite their affection for these places, it's just like another public good that's been ripped away from us in the last generation or two.
Miguel?
I kind of see this as almost like the city equates, how they equate like culture and history as a luxury, as not an actual like economic engine for a city. When we travel to other countries, like what do we go visit? We go visit the castles and the old estates and these old things. Like when people come here, like that's what they want to see as well. They want to see the history of the sites they're visiting, which brings in money to the city, which employs people. Yeah.
Dunsmuir could be like, I'm sure some people in this crowd are familiar with like the Filoli House on the peninsula. Like Dunsmuir could be that for Oakland. Like this could be bringing people in from all over the region, all over the state to visit and spend money at our restaurants and our hotels. And when you have a wedding at a place like that, you're bringing in dozens, if not hundreds of tourists who are spending the night. So like you said, this could be part of an economic engine for Oakland. It takes a relatively small investment when we're talking about, $7 million, $10 million. Yes, it's a lot of money, but in a budget that is hundreds of millions of dollars, we're spending $7 million, $10 million on lawsuit payouts. When a bicyclist breaks their neck on a pothole, look at what this money could be going to.
All right, last question from me, so I can shut up and then ask your questions. And this is for all of you. In a perfect world, what would be the best way to maintain and preserve all these beautiful places?
It's public-private partnership.
I think our model is pretty great. So we rely on the city for some things, but we're able to, as a nonprofit, we're able to raise funds from grants, whatnot, foundations, to cover a lot of the programming that we do with there. And also it covers some of the maintenance of the space also.
And since we're talking about ideal scenarios, I'll just put in my plug. I love the Oakland History Room at the library on the 3rd floor. I love the Oakland Museum, but people still contact me all the time saying, I have these historic artifacts. Like, where can I donate them to? And I don't always have a good answer because the library and the museum have limited capacity. Berkeley, just to give an example, they have the Berkeley Historical Society, and right above their little mini museum, they have this giant storage space where they have these incredible archives. It's like this huge warehouse, essentially. And so I would love to see like an Oakland History Center, repository for our community memories in one of these historic spaces. I mean, what better place to gather Oakland history than in one of our most historic buildings?
Yeah. All right, it's time for questions from the audience. You ready? Perfect. All right. Does Oakland have or plan to have any historic sites devoted to telling the stories of working people as opposed to the rich people whose buildings survive longer?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, great question.
I would say there are historical experiences that people can participate in that do tell stories of more working class folks. So I always try to kind of gather events like that and put them out in the East Bay Yesterday Substack. But I know the Oakland Heritage Alliance just released their summer walking tour schedule. A lot of their historical walks are not just about walking through mansions. And some of the most enlightening experiences I've ever got in terms of like experiencing Oakland history up close were like Betty Marvin's walks through East Oakland and West Oakland, learning about working class history and immigrant history. So in terms of like the spaces focused on that, nothing's like popping in my mind right now as like a place devoted. I mean, there's like the Black Panther Museum and things like that, and then the Black Panther House in West Oakland. So maybe that's like the closest, but 16th Street Station, the train station, there you go. Yeah, that's another big project that Oakland Heritage Alliance is trying to protect.
Oh, the African American Library on 14th
thank you.
Street. Yes.
Yeah, AMLO. Absolutely.
Yeah, AMLO.
Good
Miguel,
suggestion.
I feel like you at Peralta, you guys do a pretty good job with that.
I just want to say our vision is that every human makes history. Our very first exhibition that we had was called Faces of Fruitvale. We interviewed 55 neighbors of the park and created panels that had an image of them, their story of how they got to Oakland. Everything that we've done, every single exhibition focuses on regular people, as you said. In 2018, we did this big exhibition called Undocumented Heart. Day laborers tell their stories. And we worked with a group of day laborers who basically just told us their stories of how they got to the U.S. We paired them with Marion Coleman, who was a fabric artist and a painter, and they painted their stories and quilted their stories. After that evolved into a theater project with Azucena I wrote about. And every single thing we do reflects the people of Fruitvale in our community.
All right, this one is for all of you. So whoever wants to kind of kick off. Someone wants to know, would it be more efficient if the nonprofits like Friends of Peralta, the former Dunsmuir, the Cameron, if all these groups were under one umbrella? Miguel?
Perhaps. I think, as Mandolin said, like if all the departments knew what each other were doing, I think that would be extremely helpful. When the electricians came by to look at the fire damage, they were commenting how they don't know what the carpenters were doing. And that, to me, was a disconnect. I was like, don't you guys have a database or something that you type in your notes? Maybe they don't. They probably don't. So I think if the departments knew what each other were doing, perhaps there'd be less redundancy, more efficiency. They would know what's needed more than other jobs. But as Mandolin said, the city also takes their bite.
I would just add, like, even if there's not like some kind of like formal board or something like that, just having these kind of like coalition get-togethers, I think would be really useful for just having people sharing kind of ideas and feedback and resources, and even just like connecting to build the relationships that you need. So like from these kinds of conversations, the ideas spring. Miguel, you were talking earlier about how Peralta Hacienda Park kind of sprang from this one neighborhood activist. And that's kind of what gives me hope about some of these spaces, is that, yes, there needs to be like a movement, there needs to be a lot of people involved, but like one or two super, super motivated people can make an incredible amount of things happen. Like Cameron Stanford, a big part of that was that one lady from Piedmont who like came down and took that place under her wing and like did decades and decades of work to restore it and basically save the city from turning it into a parking lot. So I feel like if we keep doing events like this and bringing together kind of coalitions of like the historic house folks, those ideas will emerge, the kind of like superstars of the movement will emerge, and like hopefully they'll help spearhead the kind of movement we need on these issues.
The arts in Oakland are in jeopardy. And so there's a coalition right now of all the arts organizations led by Oakland Museum, Children's Fairyland, Chabot Science Center. All these organizations, big and small, we're all coming together and we all share ideas. We collaborate, we advocate. We're trying to raise money, trying to really impart onto the city the arts culture is an economic engine. We're not just an amenity. It's not just a thing to go, enjoy and ooh and ah at. I mean, it is that, but it also brings in money.
We're getting to the last question. I made it. Thank you all for your questions. Someone wants to know, is there a centralized website that gives links to these historic homes with info on public access? I will start off and say that the ones that are owned by the city of Oakland, if you just type Oakland Historic Properties, the link comes up from the city's website. If you go on oaklandside.org and search Oakland History, you will have access to all the stories that I've written about various buildings, homes, anything and anything you can think about Oakland history. And I want to make sure the folks know how to reach you, Mandolin, your work, Oakland Heritage Alliance. Let's kick off.
I would just add real quick to as a response to that last question as well. Check out the Oakland Wiki as well,
yeah.
Which is not only something that you can use to learn about these houses, but you can do your own original research and add to the Oakland Wiki. This is a community resource that I feel like a lot of us use often, but maybe don't contribute to as much as we should. There's newspapers in the library that you can scan, or artifacts that you can take photos of and upload to this incredible site. And like people always ask, what can I do? It's not just always these grand gestures. Like no one person is probably going to save a historic house, but like you can be a part of the process of building this legacy and creating this history by contributing to things like the Oakland Wiki.
Shout out to Gene. He's here from Oakland Wiki. Yes. Miguel.
It's interesting talking about databases. That's one of the things that I've complained about the most. The fact that there's no register, no database of how you can just easily go to and find like all the cultural amenities and resources in Oakland. I wish there was like an Oakland culture and arts wiki where you can just like, where artists themselves, like individual artists can go up and upload their work and be like, I'm available to paint, to do murals, or museums and their hours, or just any kind of resource. It just doesn't exist. And this is actually one of the things we've been talking about in this coalition of art organizations that are getting together, is how can we develop a resource like this for the community to just easily, like in a few clicks, find out what you need.
Mandolin.
So we are oaklandparks.org. You can find us there. And if you are near a park and you see some friendly neighbors helping to pick up, we're usually connected with them. We are an umbrella for a lot of those groups. So that's a way to connect with us. And there's many hands make light work, and together we'll get there.
Are there any opportunities for folks to volunteer that you can think of?
All the time. The three big days in the year are Creek to Bay Day, which will be in September. It's a citywide and city-endorsed activity. Most of the parks will have an activity. And then Martin Luther King Day of Service is the other one, and then Earth Day. So those three are the big citywide ones. But if you see some friendly neighbors with their orange vests on in a park, they're usually doing that weekly.
And so people can find the East Bay Yesterday podcast anywhere you find podcasts, Spotify, etc. And then also I do a monthly newsletter called the East Bay Yesterday Substack, where I announce events I'm doing, also other local history news. Just to give a little example of one of my fun upcoming events, a former culture maker, Dorothy Lazard.
We love Dorothy.
If you guys don't know Dorothy Lazard, she ran the Oakland History Room at the library for many years, and she's got a brand new book coming out this summer, and I'll be doing a Q&A with Dorothy at Cleo's bookstore over by the lake in a couple months. So that's the type of event that I'm sharing the word about on the East Bay Yesterday Substack, and lots of other events as well. But I know we all love Dorothy here, so I want to give her a shout out.
And then Oakland Heritage Alliance, oaklandheritage.org. That's how you can find the fine folks from the Oakland Heritage Alliance. Well, our time has run out, but I want to thank every single one of you for being here tonight. Thank you to Miguel, Mandolin, Liam. Thank you so much for being here. What a treat. What a treat. Thank you. Have a great night.
Azu. Thank you, Oakland Side.
That's this week's episode of Oaklandside 510. Thank you to Cityside's Director of Events, Becky Couch Alvarado, for organizing and planning the Culture Makers event. And thank you to our arts and community reporter, Azucena Rasilla, for moderating the discussion. Special thanks to our panelists and everyone who showed up to our live event. It is so great getting to see all of you out in the community. This episode was produced by Mark Nieto and hosted by me, Tasneem Raja. On behalf of our entire newsroom, thank you for showing up for Oakland. We'll see you next week.